Hello and welcome to this podcast from the BBC World Service. Please let us know what you think and tell other people about us on social media. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
It's midnight GMT. Hello, I'm Sasha Twining and this is Business Matters on the BBC World Service. We're connecting the time zones and today we're live in Seoul, South Korea and Silicon Valley, California. We'll hear about China's growing influence on the tech world and why giants like Facebook and Amazon are unhappy with new privacy laws in Hong Kong.
It's not something that has occurred for just the first time. Often companies in China need to be reminded, despite how large they are, despite how important they are to the domestic economy and even global economy, that they need to be paying attention to the Communist Party.
Plus, we'll hear why South Korea and Israel are swapping COVID vaccines and how many employees in Iceland are moving to a 4-day week after a trial showed productivity stayed up. That's Business Matters here on the BBC.
Hello, I'm Eileen McHugh with the BBC News. The Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has condemned an attack in the centre of Amsterdam on the prominent investigative journalist Peter R. de Vries. Witnesses said 5 shots were fired and Mr. de Vries is said to be in a critical condition in hospital. Amsterdam's mayor, Femke Halsema, has paid tribute to him.
Peter R. de Vries is voor ons allemaal een nationale held.
Peter R. de Vries is a national hero for all of us, an uncommonly brave journalist, tireless in his search for justice, fully independent and free of spirit. He stands for people in need, for the parents whose child has been murdered or people who have been wrongly convicted. He keeps the investigative authorities on their toes, and with that he keeps the rule of law on course. He isn't finished yet at all.
The Governor of New York State, Andrew Cuomo, has declared a disaster emergency following a surge in gun violence. He said more than 50 people died in shooting incidents over the 4th of July weekend alone. The move allows for a number of measures, as our North America correspondent David Willis explains.
It enables the state of New York to quickly allocate money and resources to areas where gun violence is at its worst. Among Governor Cuomo's plans are the creation of an Office of Gun Violence Prevention, intended to pinpoint where resources are most needed, the creation of a department to track the illegal flow of guns from other states, and job training programs for youngsters in poorer parts of the state in order to basically keep them off the streets.
The US military has cancelled a cloud computing project controversially awarded to Microsoft by the former Trump administration. The Pentagon said the JEDI contract no longer met its needs and would be offered to alternative providers. The contract's been embroiled in a legal battle after Microsoft's main rival, Amazon, accused Donald Trump of casting undue influence. Mr. Trump frequently derided Amazon's then boss, Jeff Bezos, accusing him of spreading fake news in the Washington Post. There have been wild celebrations in North London and across Italy after a penalty shootout victory over Spain in the first semi-final of football's Euros. The match at Wembley ended 1-1 after extra time, but after 2 Spanish misses, the midfielder, Jorginho, coolly slotted home to win the match for the Italians. He said the side's progress was made possible by a great relationship between the players and their manager.
From the first time we were together, almost 3 years ago, when the coach came in, he always said he believed in us, and it was just very good to have that feeling, you know. We start growing up as a group, as a team. It doesn't matter who's going to play because this group just supports each other all the time.
World News from the BBC.
Hello and welcome to Business Matters. I'm Sasha Twining. On the programme today, what is China's aim when it comes to big tech? We hear what has been happening in Hong Kong, where a new law is unsettling the big US tech firms and adding to the unease about stricter regulation from China. Plus, we hear from a farmer in Georgia who, after researching her family tree, has decided to try and make amends and reparations.
Just hearing that my family had enslaved people was a very gut reaction. And then he had her name and he said, her name was Hester.
More on that coming up. Also in the programme today, what do you think about a 4-day working week? Well, it's worked for Iceland. Productivity is up after an extended trial. We'll discuss if it's the way forward and what challenges could be ahead with my guests today. So yes, welcome from different sides of the globe. First of all, Alison van Diglen, the host of the Fresh Dialogues interview series and tech expert, joins us from Silicon Valley in California. Good afternoon. Late afternoon there, Alison.
Yes, indeed. Thanks so much. Great to join you, Sasha.
It's good to have you on the programme again. Also joining us from South Korea, Jasper Kim, author, attorney and professor in conflict management at Ewha University, who's joining us from Seoul. Good morning, Jasper.
Hi, good morning, Sasha from Seoul.
And it's lovely to have you with us as well. Now, yesterday on the programme, if you joined us, then we were talking about the Chinese taxi hailing app, Ditu Chuxing. Now, if you recall, this is the app that just a week ago debuted on the New York Stock Exchange, valued at around $75 billion. Well, a week is a long time. Since then, China's internet regulator stepped in, claimed to have found violations of data collection and ordered it deleted from Chinese app stores. Now, as you would expect, that's caused much consternation for would-be investors. Shares down on Tuesday by around 22%. Now, today on the programme, we bring you news of China's efforts to exert more control over Hong Kong, efforts which are making the tech giants of Silicon Valley nervous. Let's give you some background to this. The authorities are trying to crack down on what's become known as doxing. That's revealing someone's personal information without their permission, and police officers in Hong Kong have been frequent targets of this during anti-government protests. Here's Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, speaking earlier on Tuesday.
As we all know, many people in Hong Kong have been traumatized by doxing on the internet for a long time. There's broad support in society to solve this problem. So this time, the amendment to the legislation is to solve this problem. Our amendments target illegal doxing behavior and empowers government officials to take action and carry out investigations. If an online platform is concerned about the privacy law, government officials will be happy to meet with them to listen to their concerns.
So that's the background. Well, the Asia Internet Coalition, which is a group representing firms including Amazon, Facebook and Twitter, has written to the Hong Kong government to express concern about these new proposed privacy laws. They say it could make them liable for the malicious sharing of private information online. Now, the letter from them suggests that the only way to avoid sanctions would be for companies to refrain from investing and offering services in Hong Kong. In other words, big tech leaving Hong Kong after Chinese interventions. Well, earlier I spoke to Scott Kennedy, Senior Advisor in Chinese Business from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington.
All of China's recent regulations and actions with regard to Hong Kong clarify that the era of one country, two systems is over. It's now one country, one system. And so those that live in Hong Kong are now being treated like they live anywhere else in China with respect to data privacy, the media. And so this is just another part of that ongoing story that people are already increasingly, unfortunately, very familiar with.
And when you look at the increased regulatory crackdowns or interventions that we are now seeing from China towards tech firms, what do you think will be the upshot for let's start with the homegrown Chinese tech firms? First of all, those within China, and then we'll talk about those trying to raise capital outside.
Sure. I think the actions that Beijing has taken against Alibaba, against Didi, and others are meant to kill several birds with a single stone. They're trying to remind everybody that the Communist Party is boss and that firms, despite their size, despite their significance to society and consumers, must toe the line. In addition to that, these companies that the Chinese leadership is focused on have accumulated an immense amount of data on Chinese consumers and others. And this data does not belong just to these firms. It belongs to the party as well, as we've seen through these actions. And so, again, it's not something that has occurred for just the first time. Often companies in China need to be reminded, despite how large they are, despite how important they are to the domestic economy and even global economy, that they need to be paying attention to the Communist Party. And the party has just chosen a very assertive, in-your-face approach to get everybody's attention.
We saw the share price today of Didi Chuxing, the Chinese ride-hailing app, crash by something like 22% on the New York Stock Exchange. Given that, what future do you see for other Chinese companies wanting to have their IPOs abroad, wanting to have their place in America?
Well, it's unclear from what we're seeing with Didi and a couple other Chinese companies whose share prices have tanked recently, what the long-term significance will be. We know that this is a signal that you need to be sure that you are 100% on the same page with China's regulators. It also means that investors internationally need to pay attention to those things. You can't just look at the prospectus and go, oh, we're sure that the company has covered everything. It could be that what the Chinese government is saying is that not only are we trying to assert authority now over these companies, it could be that over the long term, they are less enthused about having Chinese companies list abroad. And at the same time, the volatility that they've created through their actions has, stuck it to international investors, which maybe it should be a bonus to Beijing. I would say that this strategy, if it is a cohesive strategy, is probably going to backfire because it's going to suppress innovation in China, eliminate the benefits that Chinese companies and the Chinese government get from international listings. They get a significant amount of transparency and improvement in corporate governance for Chinese companies, even at home, through these listings. And it's going to further limit these companies' abilities to expand on the global market.
Scott Kennedy there. Let's get the views of my guests. Alison Van Diklen's in California. Let me come to you first on this one, Alison. It's very much your area, tech firms. I mean, how do you think this will evolve in the US, and how will it impact, as Scott says, the ability of Chinese firms to expand into the global market?
Absolutely. It's going to create a lot of uncertainty. There's a long pipeline of potential IPOs by Chinese companies, and a lot of them are going to be pausing and looking at what happened in the last week and saying, we don't want that to happen to us. Billions were knocked off market values overnight. And so there's just a lot of uncertainty. And what's going on in Hong Kong means that employees could become personally liable for what's published on the platforms. And so, the idea of facing huge fines and imprisonment is a big impact for companies like Google, Twitter, Amazon, Apple, etc. So they may be forced to pull out of Hong Kong. And as Scott said, it's one country, one system now. Where Hong Kong tried to hang on to its independence and it's failed.
Jasper, let me bring you in on this one. Jasper Kim in South Korea. Would you suggest now that consumer tech is almost becoming the new geopolitical battlefield here?
Oh, definitely. I think it's a whole new dimension, and I think that people have to be ultra aware of it, as the commenters have said, because the battle over data and data privacy, which is a derivative of data itself, is really going to be front and center in terms of not just consumers who are using, these tech products like Didi, but also, people who want to invest in China, people who are interested in doing business in China. So I think everyone's going to take a look and kind of rethink their business model and think about data privacy right up at the top of things.
Alison, who do you think is the main loser here? Is it the Chinese tech firms? Is it the investors who want to put their money into them? Or indeed, actually, is it the consumers who may well miss out?
I think across the board, the obvious short-term losers are the people that invested in Didi last week and then have seen the share price tank by over 20%. And I do think Scott Kennedy made an important point, to look long-term. Chinese innovation is going to be impacted by this. Entrepreneurs in China are going to say, well, maybe I need to move to America to be truly innovative and have the freedom to innovate without being shackled by these special regulations and, the politicians basically having the upper hand.
Just very briefly, do you think this means we're going to see more of a split tech market? We'll have firms serving China, firms serving the rest of the world, and indeed, what is that going to mean for the consumer? I'm just thinking of TikTok, Chinese parent company, but there's actually more hours now spent on TikTok than there is on YouTube or Netflix. It's hugely popular.
That's true. I think, a bifurcation is very likely, and it's very unfortunate for, the state of the world. I think it's the whole thing is a power play. The Chinese government wants to show it's in charge, or wants to be seen, to move in that direction. And this sensitive data issue, they're using that as a reason for this, but they also want to keep investment wealth in China.
All right, Alison and Jasper, for the moment, thank you. Now, over the last year, since the death of George Floyd in the United States, the pledges from businesses to restructure or acknowledge the structural inequalities within America have increased. And among the promises of equality with better pay and better job opportunities for African Americans, there have been some conversations around reparations, the idea that practical measures and financial payments could make amends or go some way to address previous wrongs. There's also a bill currently making its way through Congress which would open a conversation about discrimination and the possibility of compensation to the descendants of slaves. Now, that's America as a nation, but what if individuals in the US, researching their own family history, decided that they wanted to try to right previous wrongs? Well, let me introduce you to Stacey Marshall. She's a farmer from northwest Georgia who's trying to do just that.
I run a grass-fed beef farm and have milking goats and chickens and a small garden for my family, and a mother of 3 little small sweet girls.
So you've got your hands full with family as well as farming.
It's a beautiful mess over here most days. Lots of chaos.
The best type of chaos.
There's not much difference between being a mom and a farmer, to be honest.
Well, I hope your animals do exactly what you tell them to do. Tell me a bit more about your farm and what happened when you started looking into the history of the land and your family.
There was this significant story that my grandfather told me, actually, when I became a mother. I was visiting them, and I was holding my newborn and having a difficult time nursing her. And my grandfather, at that moment of seeing me nurse, holding a fretting child, was like, hey, you have inherited this milk supply issue that most of the women in your family have, and it dates back hundreds of years. He said that's actually how our family came to acquire slaves. And so I think for me, understand, like, that moment was a significant moment because of just hearing that my family had enslaved people. It was a very gut reaction. And then he had her name, and he said, her name was Hester. And the way he was telling and making sense of the story was, saying that she, sustained our family, and we would not have survived. But then there was also the reality of that she was also enslaved by the family. And so I actually found the slave schedule that had no names on it, but it had 7 numbers, and it had the sex and the race and ages. And so I saw there were 2 men in their 30s, and then 1 woman, and then 4 children. And the youngest was 5.5 months old. And so I think that at that point, what I began to feel is now this history is like I'm holding this document, and I have this family story that I've heard. So it was this, trying to put the pieces together, and was able to find some more documents where I actually found Hester's name. And then after the Civil War, she became a landowner and stayed in the community and continued to work for the family. At that point, I had this really conflicting thoughts on what to do with this. In my family, there's kind of that sense of like, you don't air your dirty laundry. So there's kind of this sense of shame of maybe I should just shove it in a drawer and not talk about it. Or if I did talk about it, would people feel that I'm trying to glorify, something that also was a horrific time in history? And so I felt very conflicted on even talking about it.
This is a highly personal, extremely emotive subject, but you've wanted to do something practical about this. This is not just for you. This is not a case of tracing, Hester's descendants through the lines. You want to do something practical. So what options do you feel that you have?
That's a question I'm asking myself every day. My community has been a big part of that journey. The driving motive for letting this story come outside of myself was my community, my spiritual elders, who are actually descendants of enslaved people. My neighbor, who is a dear friend and spiritual mentor, Melvin Mosley, when I shared the documents with him, he is African American, and, he wanted to see the documents to see if he knew any of the names, if they were any of his people or anybody in the community that was still here. And making amends and making it right. Just what does that look like? What does that look like as far as reparations? What does that look like as far as reconciliation? I think often we want to throw money when we have a problem and think that fixes everything. And so I think for me, understanding that this is not just a monetary exchange, but this is a very delicate, this involves other family stories, and it's a sacred conversation. Reparations means to repair. So first there needs to be the acknowledgement that something has been broken, some harm has been done. And so that's where I'm continuing to really dive into the conversation to hear and to learn.
Everything that you're saying, it sounds like anything could be on the table. So are you considering changing land rights, handing land over? Is it financial? And where do you even start with that?
Land is probably the asset that I have. We are not a wealthy family farm. That also, I think, is something I'm trying to figure out, because some of our property is in a conservation easement, and, just to even sell the property, that could almost create another problem, right? I've honestly got some feedback of just, you should just sell your land. But that's a little harder of a thing. And even just knowing how to steward that land. The conversation gets so complicated because so then let's say I did sell the land, then I have the money. So now, who gets that money and how much? And those are all things I'm willing to explore. But I think that's where I am confessing honestly and very vulnerably here. That's a place that continues to get stuck in. So then I think how this conversation is turning now is for me thinking of ways of advocacy to enter into supporting funds for Black farmers. At the end of the day, I think I'm honestly asking the question, is it enough? Because it feels so vast. I think that the government funds is definitely something I am interested in learning more about, but I think that we are still in kind of a pioneering place with that. It's uncomfortable. I feel like we are generations into really not honestly talking about this. Knowing that there's been families in our community that in the 1950s and 60s were denied federal funding, that's a place to start. This goes much to a more national conversation of how do we address that.
Farmer Stacey Marshall speaking to me a little earlier. Alison, let me come to you first on this one. What's your first reaction on what Stacey wants to do? I mean, do you feel it's up to individuals or corporate America or the government? Where do you start?
I applaud Stacey for acknowledging and coming forward. It's a very, very hard thing to do, especially in the South. But I would bow to the experts on this, and the experts on formal reparations are saying it's better that she uses her time to create real change. In other words, encourage Congress to do something, create a super fund, a reparations super fund, for example, with an independent board of African Americans who identify and, give money to suitable programs and projects.
I mean, Jasper, let me ask you about this one, because it is very obviously a very different set of circumstances, but you there in Korea have experience of talking about reparations. And without getting into that case with Japan considers it closed, but where do you actually start with trying to put a financial figure on such an emotional and personal case anyway?
Well, that's $1 million question. And I think it has to involve not just economics, but, the social implications and, where do you start the timeline? Where do you end it? So, I agree with Alison. I mean, I think that, the government has to set forth the tone and set the parameters. And, other companies can also, get into this type of system as well and opt in and do what they can to the extent that they can. But, it's also going to be highly politicized, not just in the U.S., but, other countries that deal with majority and minority issues, but particularly with slavery in the U.S. I think it's a very, very touchy subject. I'd say it's near dynamite, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be tackled.
No, that's a very good point. And Alison, Stacey said that she wants to open the conversation. I mean, do you believe that conversation will get easier or harder for her to have?
Oh, gosh, it's impossible to say, possibly harder. I mean, the part of that report, that resonated with me is she was talking about cousins that, still fly the flag for slavery. And they're saying it's not about hate, it's about heritage.
Well, there's so many different views, but she is opening the conversation. Stacey Marshall there in Georgia. Welcome back to Business Matters with me, Sasha Twining, and our guests on the programme today, Alison Van Diglen in California and Jasper Kim, who joins us from South Korea. Now, depending on where you are in the world listening to us, what time zone you're in, you're coming up to being halfway through the working week. But what if you were already more than halfway through? 2 days down, 2 to go, and a long weekend on the cards. And what if it was like that every week? Well, I'm talking about a 4-day working week with, and here's the crucial bit, the same amount of pay as a standard Monday to Friday. Iceland has been running this experiment for the last few years, and it would seem that the idea has been a success. Well, earlier I spoke to Gunmunda Haraldsson, a researcher at ALDA, the Association for Sustainability and Democracy, who's reported on the experiment.
On the whole, the trials conducted in Iceland went very well. The trials encompassed both institutions with the Reykjavik City Council and the government. And yes, the results were excellent. First of all, the services remained the same, more or less, and productivity increased or was the same. So all the same services were provided, and there was no extra cost to this. The main benefits to the staff included less stress and less burnout and more time with their families. And as measured in surveys, the quality of the service did not decrease.
So these were different types of workplaces. Tell us if there was a difference in where the experiment worked better, where the 4-day week worked better than in maybe in other types of workplaces.
So this is a shorter working week. People usually worked, most of these workplaces, they worked a 5-day week in a regular, where there are regular hours. But the hours of work were shortened either every day or some days, for example, so often on Fridays. And that was very popular. In some cases, it was down to like the roles when they were able to use their shorter hours. So it was possibly easiest for office workers. However, it was started in workplaces which were considered to be very stressed and there was a high workload. And even despite that, they succeeded and they continued to be part of the trial all the way. Where this has proved maybe harder is, or more complex, is night shifts. You'll have different demands on people and in some cases you'll have to increase staff to be able to provide the same services.
Do you think that there's a possibility that this worked because the employees really wanted it to work and that actually after a few years down the line, productivity might drop because working a 4-day week becomes the norm?
I doubt that the productivity will fall. Of course, it worked because people wanted it, but it also worked because people figured out strategies to make it work. We already have the technological basis for letting this work. So you need the motivation to do this. You need the employer, the staff. They need to want this, of course. But it has also to be understanding, and the same with managers. They also were keen on doing this and trying this. But everyone understood that this was an experiment. It could be cancelled if it didn't work.
What do you think was the biggest concern from employers before they started this? How did they think it might go?
So in this case, there were two considerations in the beginning. They were slightly scared that services would be reduced, understandably. But over time, they gradually learned that, yes, we definitely can change things around here. A second consideration that came up later was that they would sometimes like to have to shorten even more, but because these trials were not supposed to cost anything, they were supposed to be zero budget, which they were not allowed to do any more tweaking to be able to shorten more. But they would sometimes have liked to spend some money to be able to do that, but they couldn't. So maybe these were the two main considerations, and they were understandable. However, once you start to think and do the calculations and you look at how things are structured, you'll figure out ways to do this.
Gudmunda Haraldsson speaking to me earlier about Iceland's 4-day working week. Let's get the thoughts of Alison and Jasper, right, both of you. Who fancies doing a 4-day working week? Alison, yes, no?
Oh, I think it sounds a great idea. Absolutely. But I think, the bigger picture of this is it's a lasting legacy of the pandemic. It's allowed every public sector and business leader to be more mindful. Do we want to return to business as usual, or can we recreate, the working week, offering more flexibility, empowerment and choice? And I was interested to read about the 4-day week campaign in London. And they suggested another win in that it could cut the UK's carbon footprint if we went to a 4-day week. So basically, it's a triple win for workers, for the environment and for families.
I tell you what, it's interesting that you say, and sort of link it immediately to the pandemic, whereas actually this experiment started way before it. I think it was 2015 or 2016. So, it's been going a long time before it. But interesting that maybe actually businesses are more open to these sorts of ideas because of the
point. The time is right. The information. Yeah, I agree. The information was gathered over the preceding years, but now the time is right for leaders to say, hey, let's do things differently, or let's look at it. And there are a lot of upsides.
Jasper, you're in South Korea. What was your first thought about a 4-day working week? Because Korea, very long known for having very long working hours. What's your gut reaction to this?
Yeah, that's right. I think historically South Korea had one of the longest, and I think at one point, based on the OECD, the longest average work week. And it wasn't until just a few years ago that people we're easily working 6 days a week. Now it's 5 days a week, and now the government is mandating that weekly hours should go down to 52 hours, and ultimately aiming for 40 hours. So 4 days a week, that would be a dream. In South Korea, there's a confusion element where employment and working is bifurcated between formal hours for work and informal. And the formal hours are what we're talking about. That's logged on 40 hours, 52 hours, etc. But that's just part of the overall fabric of the working culture in South Korea, arguably other Confucian states like China and Japan, where you really have to spend after hours with your colleagues to create this good atmosphere, so to speak. So there's a cohesive unit, everyone thinks as one, and that involves post-work drinks, dinners, and all this other stuff, going to singing rooms, and that takes a toll on people too. It should bond, but sometimes it breaks the fabric because people are just so exhausted.
So it's almost the official work hours, but then the unofficial work hours, which are sort of necessary to build the team so that the teams work properly in the official work hours, and therefore you're working more or less all the time. I mean, Alison, is there also that sort of culture in Silicon Valley that because we hear a lot about the sort of after-work entertainment, so to speak, but it's almost expected so that you're team building and working towards what happens in the official working hours?
Well, I would contradict that feeling. I mean, what has happened during the pandemic, the last 18 months, the tech world has seen that, with a few exceptions, technology can prosper with people working from home. There's not, there are some key things that have to happen in the office, with computers or with robots or whatever. But a lot has prospered without it. And in fact, I've been following Adam Grant. He's a professor at the Wharton School, and he's done he's a organizational psychologist, and he's famously quoted as saying, research shows that people waste a lot of time at work, and in most jobs, people get more done in 6 focused hours compared to 8. And there was also a McKinsey study that showed executives were up to 500% more productive in a state of flow. In other words, being in the zone, so actually being out of the office and, having fewer interruptions, shorter meetings, and turning off your notifications, you can get more done. So again, this kind of underlines this, the power of the 4-day working week.
I'm not sure actually though whether I have less interruptions when I'm out of the office, when I'm trying to work at home.
I hear you.
I think it's been a very interesting experience, and incidentally, I am back at home in the home office tonight, and having sort of the hours before the programme, trying very hard, as I'm sure I succeeded, in concentrating on what was going on here rather than everything around me. Jasper, Alison is being very clear that the pandemic and the different way that the businesses operated during that would make them sort of, more easy to accept different ways of working. Is there any sense of that sort of spilling over into the work culture in Korea?
I totally agree. I think with the pandemic, it's a crisis, and crisis is really the opportune time for change. And, in South Korea, it's either 100% change or no change. There has to be some type of, exogenous shock that comes into the country. And so, it'll be interesting to see. But because of the informal, working culture, I think that, firms are more reluctant to let people work from home. It's almost an oxymoron, working from home. People want to see, with their own eyes, their loyal, troops, so to speak, and that they're working, and FaceTime's important, and relationships. If anything, relationships are king in South Korea. And relationships linked to loyalty. So these two things come hand in hand, and they're sort of the A and B alpha beta metrics of, who gets promoted, who gets a corner office. So I wish that everything could go online and remote, and I wish that people could work from home. It's good for the environment, it's good for people's mental wellness and even productivity. But whether that'll happen, I'll just keep my fingers crossed in South Korea. That again is the dream.
Well, okay. Well, so what's it going to take to realise that dream? What sort of cultural shift is there going to need to be?
Yeah, I think it'll be this. It'll be other countries, especially California and maybe Western Europe, because these are 2 big influential regions for South Korea that they look at, they benchmark, and they say, oh, should we adopt or reject these type of working standards? And, to a lesser extent, Japan and China. But if it works in these other places, then I think that'll be the catalyst that says, you know what, we've got to try because we can't be beat by these other countries. We have to keep up with this trend, and this is the latest trend, and let's see if it works. And I think that's a mental issue, a cognitive thing, where we basically say, yes, we accept, we have an open source system to trying something new. I think that's going to be key. And so California, Silicon Valley is sort of leading it at this point. So hopefully it'll get there.
Is there also a slight issue over trust? You're describing presenteeism, people needing to be seen, or rather employers needing to see employees. Is it sort of a case of we need to see you because we need to trust what you are doing and what your productivity is?
Yeah, here it's more not how productive are you at work, but how long do you work? And so, it's also a trade-off because, as these studies show that we're listening to, the longer the work week, the less productive people become. People are just constantly tired, they're not in the zone, et cetera. But that's not really the main metric in South Korea up to this point. And it might be just a function of this, but also, as I talked about before, less hours working in other countries. But I think it's also going to be a generational shift with people, millennials, et cetera, who are used to doing things online and actually might be much more comfortable doing things online than in person. Because of the Confucian hierarchy in the South Korean work culture in many places, not all, is that the people who are in charge it's very seniority based. Either it might be in their 40s or 50s. And so they're not used to this and it's different. And people often reject change and difference. So it's just a matter, might be a general shift, a generational shift. And they'll see things completely different. And it might be where one day everything just completely flips upside down.
As it has for so many people over the last year. Just briefly, Alison, I noticed that Apple is talking about decentralising as well. Is that also to do with the quality of life, that they've sort of realised that people don't necessarily want to up sticks and move to them if they want to work for one of the big tech firms in Silicon Valley?
Exactly, Sasha. Basically, in Silicon Valley, there's an arms race over talent between Facebook, Google, Apple, and other tech companies. And many companies have done U-turns in their policies on remote working. They're realizing we can't succeed without a workforce that is really engaged and productive. And so they're bending over backwards to offer the maximum flexibility and attract top talent. And it brings in, I talk about, I'm kind of in sort of looking at Silicon Valley, but it's a world stage for top talent. So it will be interesting to see if Korea changes its ways to keep their top talent.
Well, you're leading the way, apparently, but I'm not sure whether you have many karaoke bars or singing bars that Jasper was talking about there in Silicon
Valley. We have
everything
in Silicon Valley.
Of course you do. Of course you do. Jasper, I wanted to talk to you about something else that is happening in South Korea that is really quite interesting. It's great that we have you on the programme today because South Korea is due to receive a shipment from Israel of short shelf life coronavirus vaccines. Tell us more about this. How has this come about?
Well, South Korea was kind of heralded as sort of, benchmark for how to do things in terms of, contact tracing, quarantines, and all this other stuff. And that kept COVID cases down for, the first few months of the COVID pandemic. But, recently with the Delta variant in particular, it's had a big impact in terms of the COVID numbers. I think in the last few weeks, I think the numbers are probably, in the low 400 to 500, something like that per day of new COVID cases. But now it's spiked to over 1,000. And, with the pandemic and COVID, who knows if that's going to be linear or, what's worrisome for officials is that it could be exponential, explosive, cases. And so, this is badly needed because most of the vaccines are, very low in number. And what they have is AstraZeneca mostly. And then after that is Pfizer and Janssen. So with AstraZeneca, there have been such media reports about, sort of the negative aspects of it. And so Koreans have really kind of, have kind of shied away some from getting the vaccine. And what people really want is sort of the Pfizer vaccine. That's considered like winning the lotto. And so to have this, swap agreement in effect with Israel to get 700,000, Pfizer shots, even if they're close to expiring, they will be gobbled up in a second on the first day or second day, I'm sure. Everyone's online. It's like trying to get into the hottest concert there is, except these are vaccine shots that can save your life.
And to be clear, all of them are working extremely well. But, any country that receives this sort of vaccine swap, and we're calling it a swap because South Korea is going to pay it back later, is that right, from a shipment that you're due to get later in the year?
Yes, exactly. So it's a swap basically for, Pfizer, vaccine shots now, and then South Korea will return the favor, later on. So even though Israel doesn't seem like it needs it, but this is an effect, in my view, from Israel's perspective, and other countries too, like the U.S., is a new form of soft power and vaccine diplomacy, because it's basically like the old days of giving a loan or food or something like that, the Marshall Plan. But here, Israel's saying, listen, we're going to give you these vaccines. Timing is everything here, and you really need it. We don't need it, so it works out. David Ricardo, the economist, would be very happy about this. But you owe us one is, in effect, I would think, the sort of the informal behind-the-scenes talk between these two countries. And so it's a win-win. And but South Korea really needed this, and hopefully it'll get to what the current president, Moon Jae-in, wanted, was herd immunity by November. It seems like it's because of the Delta variant, it's throwing everything off, not just for South Korea, but for many countries. But, the timing of this was, very well placed for South Korea to receive this.
It will be very interesting to see if this sort of vaccine swamp, as you're calling it, could actually be a framework or a mechanism to get vaccines around the world. Because as we know and have been talking on this programme for months, very conscious that some countries have a surplus or have over-ordered and have, different supply lines. Many countries, as we know only too well, are without enough. Jasper, it's very interesting to see what is happening there. Thank you for updating us on that one. You're listening to Business Matters here on the BBC World Service. Now, just a couple of hours ago, one of the world's most prestigious film festivals officially opened in Cannes in the south of France. And this year, the festival was not virtual, but it was in person, with stars once again sashaying down a red carpet. Now, this is the film that's been chosen to open the festival.
First time I fell in love. Woke up next to the girl. And escaped fast and far.
Well, that's the trailer for Annette. It's a fantasy operatic musical, which is the first English-language film from French director Léos Carax. The American actor Adam Driver is one of the stars of the film.
It is surreal to be here. This is my favourite festival, Cannes. I've always, before I came here, looked at it as a marker of great films. So for the festival opening up again and being here as the opening film, this thing that we've been working on for 7 years, is a sense of relief and excitement, I guess.
Well, his co-star, the Oscar-winning French actress Marion Cotillard, said it was great to be back at Cannes.
Cannes est un festival que j'adore.
Cannes is a festival I love. I've been coming every year for about a decade, and now life is starting to open back up. Cultural life, the life of the cinema, with a film by Léos Carax at the Cannes Festival. It's a great joy.
C'est une très grande joie.
But what is it like to be back in person, where the glamorous outfits have to be full length rather than just head and shoulders for the video call? Well, here's Hannah Strong, associate editor of the film magazine Little White Lies, telling my colleague Mike Johnson what it's been like.
I've actually been really surprised because I expected there to be a sort of element of trepidation to the other guests, but I think everyone is so relieved that the festival's actually happened. Of course, after last year having to cancel pretty close to the festival, and I think even I was doubting until I got on the plane to Nice that this was actually going to be a reality this year. So I wouldn't say it's a party atmosphere, but definitely there's a lot of kind of smiles and a lot of people very happy to see each other again. The staff are very, very welcoming us back with open arms, and it's all been running remarkably smoothly, actually.
Yeah, there must be some differences, though. I mean, are numbers limited, restrictions, that kind of thing? And anything that strikes you?
Yes, the biggest difference this year is definitely having to test ourselves for COVID every 2 days. So before we go into the screenings, it is quite surreal having to spit into a tube every 48 hours to watch a movie. And the other big change we've got this year is tickets, which has never been a thing in the past. Everyone talks about the queues in Cannes, and you queue for hours and hours to see the new Tarantino or the new Bong Joon-ho. But this year, we all have to get online at 7 a.m. and book our tickets.
Tell me, though, there'll still be the traditional red carpet, the scrums of reporters and photographers?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it wouldn't be Cannes without that procession of reporters and the beautiful gowns and the tuxedos. Tonight we're going to be seeing Marion Cotillard and Adam Driver on the red carpet, which everyone's very excited about. And of course, they'll be posing for photos on the famous red steps. I think that Cannes had to have that, if nothing else. So there might be a few more masks, but there's definitely still going to be the same glamour level here as always.
Right, so there's all the glamour, all the posing. Presumably, though, there's also a big commercial imperative behind these film festivals. It is all about selling, isn't it? Bringing more bodies into cinemas, more eyeballs onto screens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the film industry has suffered so massively as a result of COVID, and film festivals are so essential for films to be able to find distribution, films to kind of get buzz for awards and for their own releases. And for Cannes itself, the city, the festival is such a huge part of the tourism in the city. It was really essential for the festival to come back in order for the city to make some money, and the local businesses and the local hotels and Airbnbs to be able to make a profit.
Do people still want to premiere their films at events like Cannes? Are these big film festivals as big a deal as they used to be?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously the past year we've really seen the continued rise of Netflix and Disney and Apple TV and all these streaming platforms having the big premiere movies of the year. But I think that the fact that so many films have been held back for Cannes, they have Wes Anderson's French Dispatch, we have Annette, which was held back, and Paul Verhoeven's Benedetta. It's just 3 films out of such a massive lineup that have been held back for a year and a half because the filmmakers wanted so desperately to premiere them at Cannes. So I think it's a real tribute to the filmmaker's vision and the kind of the prestige at Cannes, but also the kind of atmosphere of film. And I think watching films in the cinema really, nothing beats it. It's the most kind of magical experience. I have very fond memories of watching Parasite at the premiere at Cannes, and I can't wait to make some more memories like that this year.
Film journalist Hannah Strong there. Right, Jasper, I'm coming to you straight away on this one. Hannah's just mentioned Parasite, that Korean film, premiered in 2019 at Cannes. How much interest is there in Korea on this year's film festival?
I think Koreans love film, generally speaking, and, Koreans are very artistic and creative for film and dramas, music, etc. So, yeah, I think Koreans love a great movie. They love a nice drama, sad story, that type of thing. So, yeah, very much so. And it's also starting up the Busan International Film Festival, BIFF for short, later on in this fall. So it looks like things are picking up, not just in Europe, but hopefully in Asia.
And the Korean film industry is doing well still, is it?
Yes, I mean, the films are coming out, and I think what's been also a big boost is Netflix. There's been a 64% surge in, new Netflix viewers in South Korea. And, globally, I've noticed that, wherever I go, if we turn on Netflix, there's more Korean dramas and movies coming out. So, yeah, I think it's a global phenomenon, and I think that it's a win-win for everyone. Everyone loves a good movie. Everyone wants to feel good again.
Alison, getting back to a film festival, seeing stuff in the cinemas again and looking at the big releases coming out, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I'm excited to get into a movie theatre, but there have been slim pickings recently. I'm hoping that the, better movies come out soon. We've been a bit spoiled by, all the wonderful offerings on Netflix, etc.
Need them on the big screen. Well, here in the UK, it's all been about the sequel to Peter Rabbit, and then people looking forward to the Bond movie. I think that'll be the one that the industry will be looking forward to, the industry and consumers. Thank you for joining us on the programme today. Alison Van Diglen in California, Jasper Kim in South Korea. Thank you to both of my guests, and thank you to listening wherever you've been listening to us today. This is Business Matters here on the BBC World Service.
Elephants, squid, camels, hedgehog, 30 amazing animals, pangolin, lobsters, snake, cat, polar bear, cow, trap, jaw, ants, and 30 brilliant ideas that were inspired by them. A concussion-proof sports helmet, a race to develop a vaccine, a new way of exploring space. 30 Animals That Made Us Smarter is back with 30 more tales of how the animal kingdom has helped us solve complex human problems. These are truly extraordinary creatures. 30 Animals That Made Us Smarter, Season 2 from the BBC World Service. Keep the noise down and follow me. Search for 30 Animals That Made Us Smarter wherever you get your podcasts.